Topaz. Let's talk about if she's worth pulling for, if you need her, and in what situation she might be better for you than other units, especially characters like Jing Yuan. First off, you don't need her, but the question is she still going to be good? Now, she's a hunt character, meaning she's meant to be dealing more single target damage than most. Think Yansheng, think Sealy. They can have some degree of AoE or even have the ability to affect multiple enemies per action, like with Sealy's Resurgence, but nonetheless, they are still basically single target damage dealers, so they won't be comparing to the likes of Destruction characters or Erudition in terms of AoE. A lot of people have been focusing on the concept of her being able to bring someone like Jing Yuan up due to her follow-up attack or follow-up damage bonus. Don't get me wrong, that follow-up damage bonus can be, at least based on my own personal prediction and dreams, up to 55% without constellations or eidolons. So that is a pretty hefty damage bonus. The problem is, though, that if she's a hunt character, she might be dealing this single target damage-wise. So you're not getting that bonus AoE, because that damage bonus is based on her single targeted use, this skill. So you're only applying that to the boss, which may be perfectly fine in some scenarios, but if you're facing off against a lot of enemies or two larger boss mobs, it's kind of a difficult scenario to be in, especially for characters like Jing Yuan who rely entirely on follow-up attacks. Second, she's a character who is not necessarily Harmony, not Nihility, so she's not necessarily meant to just be debuffing and buffing entirely. Don't get me wrong, I understand that she can and does have the potential to do that to a slight degree, but if you're pulling for a 5-star hunt character to buff one other unit, I'm kind of just gonna say that other unit's just in a bad position, because that effort might otherwise be spent buffing up this character. Now, don't get me wrong, that in tandem with more eidolons do buff up follow-up attacks from her, from Blade, Himiko, Jing Yuan, and so on. However, with that in the same vein, I think a character like Himiko would benefit more because Himiko is also fire, and if you're putting her and Himiko onto the same team and then apply Silverwolf onto that, you have a much higher chance of applying the fire weakness break or weakness effect onto that opponent than using her solely to buff Jing Yuan. Don't get me wrong, she can buff, but is that the role you want her to do, and is it specifically for him? But regardless, I digress. As an individual unit, is she going to be a valuable pull for your accounts? Well, I think that first and foremost, any character who can buff anything is going to be more valuable than a character who's solely focusing on dealing damage. I think a way to evaluate characters is, are they tanky or do they have their own self-sustain? A character like Blade is a perfect example of this. He's incredibly tanky, but also can self-sustain with his little bit of healing. And alternatively, do they buff themselves or other characters? If they only focus on dealing damage and that's their entire role, that's perfectly fine, but if they can to a degree buff other units, I think that's better off for them and better off for the overall value, because it means they can be brought along to higher difficulty content and still do something, especially when we get into the idea and concept of building out sub DPSs, or our supports become a little bit better at dealing just damage in general. Not only this, but because she buffs follow-up attack damage, she's buffing up her own damage as a unit. And this is really nice. So yes, she can buff and bring up characters like Jing Yuan and bring up other units as a whole. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it's a bad idea, and I don't think it's a bad thing in general. I would, however, like to state that since Himiko is of the same element, and since both of them can deal follow-ups over time here and there, they can work better with Silverwolf if you do pair them together. Silverwolf in other scenarios would have a 50-50 chance of either applying the fire weakness or the lightning weakness with Jing Yuan, or even the quantum weakness, and the more of the same element you have, the better off you are. Now, I'm not saying Silverwolf is required, I'm just saying it's a hypothetical situation that you may want to consider if you intend on running all of these together, and if you're considering who benefits most from those buffs. Jing Yuan's entire damage is locked behind follow-up attacks, that's great. But you then have to consider what team are you running him in, and if you're going with someone like Fu Xuan to prevent him from being essentially crowd controlled, then you are having more of a chance to apply Quantum with Silverwolf in there. Or alternatively, you could ignore the weakness break and just go deal damage. That's perfectly fine too. She's shaping up to be a good character. I do think she'll get more value as time goes on, as we get more Erudition units, especially with a few Erudition units that have been revealed here and there. But I think as a Jing Yuan buffer, that's a given. However, my question would be, is it worth investing more into Jing Yuan at this point when you could just otherwise push those resources to another character? Topaz is probably going to be great. Topaz is going to be, for at least a while now, our only, if not our best, fire-based damage dealer. We have Himiko and Hook to compete. Hook is a 4-star, so she's realistically going to be out there running for a lot of characters and a lot of people. And Himiko's Erudition. She deals follow-up attack damage, and she has gotten better, don't get me wrong, but if Topaz is buffing follow-up attacks, then she's just going to get even stronger. Not only this, but she buffs herself to an immense degree. Her basic attacks turn into follow-up attacks. Her ultimate essentially increases her crit damage by a small degree. This means that she's arbitrarily easier to build, and in a little bit of ways, a bit more difficult. She's not necessarily doing basic attacks. Her skill and a lot of her damage is going to be considered a follow-up attack, so things that benefit follow-up attacks would be really good. Jing Yuan's Light Cone, for example, if it would work on non-Erudition characters, would be great on her. If you're considering her Light Cone, it's going to be great. I think a character like Lian Qing could benefit to a slight degree because he does do a follow-up attack, but I don't really think it's worth using on him. So as a result, her light cone is limited to her. It helps her out with crit, her own buffs help her out with crit, and her ultimate helps her out. She's doing a lot, and she's buffing herself to an immense degree. So while I think the follow-up damage is nice to say, hey, she can work with Jing Yuan, she's not really meant to be a buffer. She's just going to be dealing a lot of damage by herself. And if you want to pair Jing Yuan with her, you kind of need to consider, okay, where are the skill points going? Who's getting buffed by Ting Yun, Yukong, Bronya, or whoever else is in the party? Okay, well, do you have any characters with skill point positive, like Fu Xuan or Japard? No? Well, you are out of luck. I think she's going to be a good character. I just don't think she's going to be a massive buff for Jing Yuan unless you're intending on going for either A, Eidolons, or B, not using her as a DPS, or at least using her more as a sub DPS and are okay with missing out on skill points and skill point utilization on her. I do think Jing Yuan does need a buff, but I also think that any buff to Jing Yuan is going to buff Himiko, Serval, and pretty much anyone else in Erudition for the future. That can, to a degree, limit the damage and potential of those other characters since they're subsequently bound to whatever buffer Jing Yuan got. Topaz is looking to be a nice unit. She's looking to dish out nice damage. She's looking to really prioritize follow-up attacks. My question then is, what is Erudition's thing? Is it follow-up attacks? Is it not? I thought Hunt was just single target damage that did big damage with their skill. Why is this follow-up attack damage? I thought we learned a lesson with follow-up attacks damage with him. I really don't understand. But hey, that's just my own personal confusion and misconceptions. Whatever. Now, if you're looking at her and wondering if she's going to be a valuable pick for you, first and foremost, if you don't have Himiko, she's your only other option aside from Hook in terms of the Pyro or Fire DPS position. Second, she's your only real option as a Fire DPS. I think that it's really good to prioritize elemental coverage for your account. It's really good to not have to rely on Silver Wolf to always apply the debuffs, and the more elements you have, the better off you are. So if you're in a position to where you don't have a Himiko built and don't have a Hook built, she has more value. I also think it's worthwhile to consider that she's a Hunt character though. She's not going to have the AoE of destruction. She's going to have essentially the same elemental coverage and the same range as characters like Sealy and Yan Qing. And if you prefer AoE, you're in a good position, or if you prefer AoE, skip it. She is not a must pull. She is a good character. That's a difference. A good character or a strong character is not a must pull. I think the only way you can define a character as a must pull is if A, they offer something unique that can't be offered by anyone else long term. Luocha for a long time was essentially the closest to a must pull we got because we didn't have any other viable healers that you could really use. However, as we got more, he became less of a must pull and more of a nice to have. As of right now, she's looking to be a nice to have and a good character. A must pull, I think, is going to be decided along after the first year of the game when we see who really offers the most to your account. At that stage, it would be Silver Wolf, but she's not necessary. She's just good to have if you don't want to swap DPSs. Either way, I want to hear your thoughts down below. Will you be skipping Topaz? Will you be pulling for her? Are you buffing up Jing Yuan? Are you buffing up Himiko, Serval? Tell me your thoughts down below. As we get more Erudition characters, as we get more follow-up attack based characters, she's going to hold more value, but as of right now, I think she's just okay for herself. She's good as a unit. She isn't meant to be a buffer. I don't think, at least in the vast majority of situations, she's going to be the best buffer for your characters. Damage percent usually means less than something like crit rate and crit damage anyway. So we'll have to see how she compares to the likes of Yukong or Bronya. If you enjoyed this, found this helpful, informative, or just like listening, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Also, hey, join the server. Either one is listed in the description down below.